So how does this affect overall Latin American and South American politics, where you have a left that's not really grounded in any kind of actual organized functioning unless it really can mobilize from the extreme when there's so much infighting. Even though many people say that South America and Latin America are the most successful examples we've seen of left organizing in the aughts with the
I
pink
think
flag.
I think it's interesting because the what I think that the something that is not much mentioned, but is the trade union movement, we was very prosecuted in the times of terrorism, because it was tried to be related to like they were trying to found like relationships, although it's very different, because like um the for good and for bad, like the trade union movement like in Peru had a lot of influence from the Stalinists, like the Communist Party, and obviously like the Maoists of Shining Path and the Guevaris of the MRTA were not too sympathetic to the trade unions because of that. And the teacher trade unions were in the past under the control of another Maoist party, which was Red Fireland, but they did believe in elections, so they were opposed also to Shane. But because the reality was that those parties were seen as part of the left, so there was kind of a backlash against trade unions. But what we have seen um, in the last years, I think, since the pandemic, is that kind of there is a bit of reorganization of that trade union movement, in not completely unionized in a under a big banner of one trade union, but under different banners. And but that's is interesting. Also, something interesting is like that the this Women's Day, it was the largest Women's Day protest in Lima, which is the capital of Peru. So it has been important that the feminist movement, and to be honest, the LGBTQ movement also are kind of converging, because part of the feminist movement had always kind of this divide between like kind of the more white feminists, well off, and then kind of more of the more indigenous and feminists, which tended to be much more left wing. Um, and in the case of the LGBTQ movement, it had some, in a weird way, much. It is curious because like other LGBTQ movement was started by leftists, but at the same time, it also had some expressions, political expressions that were much more conservative. So there was a gay discotheque that was owned by a conservative, and there is a gay mayor that is also conservative. So you did have until recently, and even now, you have some gay conservatives, but now I think the organized LGBTQ movement is moving toward the left, because they see now, like the business conservatives, I guess they were more neutral on LGBTQ stuff, but always like the much more common expression of conservatism now in Peru, the far right is obviously much more against them. So in that sense, I also think that has been kind of a reaction of everything that's happening. You're starting to see a radicalization of minorities and a radicalization of workers.
Mm. Switching up gears a little bit, Mexico is looking at a massive election, not just a possible election of the country's first female president, but there are tens of thousands of local and federal positions up for grabs. Do you think Claudia Scheinbaum wins? If so, will she ruffle the feathers in the West if she attempts to move away from fossil fuels? Or do you see her as a continuation of AMLO? And then what do you think AMLO's legacy is going to be as a president of Mexico?
I think it's interesting because uh, to start with AMLO, I think generally like the Latin American press generally, when talking of ANLO, it generally focuses on something that gets forgotten and outside of Latin America. That in a way he has continued a lot of policies that were previous, kind of on free
Mhm.
trade, on kind of like economic integration with the United States, and also to some degree to the war. Um, so in that sense, I don't think there is going to be a very like big shift. I think that there is some sense that Sheinbaum is more progressive
Mhm.
on social issues, and I think also for some reason, like uh, at least she has been linked to the TERFs, like this is kind of a trans
I haven't seen that.
exclusionary
They
radical
linked her
feminist.
to the turfs, you said?
Yeah, so some of her links are kind of strange
Mhm.
so I think that it's interesting because now there is also going to be an election in Uruguay. For example, I see, for example, a Uruguayan left taking a much more staunch social liberal approach. But basically, because Uruguay is very secular, I don't think in Mexico you will going to be as staunch social liberal turn about its economics. I think it's going to be very complex to predict because I don't think there is going to be that much radical change, but at the same time, uh, I do feel the discourse with AMLO was very different than in the past, and that was kind of strange because, um, as you might have noticed, like the American expat community in Latin America has grown a lot,
Yeah.
and there are all over the political spectrum, but even the more right ones somehow are sympathetic to AMLO because they see the kind of is embracing an agenda of economic growth and the, like and for
He
example, some of them which
Mhm.
are is curious, maybe we could introduce another subject, are not very even the right wing experts are not very hopeful on Milei. They actually think he's going to fail.
I haven't heard very good things in the little bit of conversation I've heard politically around here. Kind of back to the point about AMLO, there's one thing that he's kind of loud about, and that's, almost that making people pay their fair share. And as you know, a person that lives in Latin America, when American companies come in, they don't pay taxes, they don't pay anything. And every so often, someone in office shakes the apple cart up and forces these people to pay up. And I know AMLO did that, walking in the door with, I want to say it was Starbucks and another company, but I haven't seen a Pemex gas station here. I've seen a Chevron, I've seen an Arco, there's a Walmart in town now. So, he's definitely friendly with American business. Um, what's funny is, I think I said this on the show before, the US radio towers are by my house. I can like walk to them. So they broadcast some things in Spanish and most of it in English. And one of the things they do is a commercial where they remind people that maybe, expats driving back and forth, that AMLO is a friend to American business.
Wow.
I
Yeah.
mean, the most weird part about like kind of the American expat communities is that for some reason like Uruguay actually has a growing expat community, but for a very simple reason, like they have an 11-year tax rebate to above certain income. So there are a lot of retirees and people that are
Mhm.
actually quite well off that move to Uruguay, which is kind of curious. And many of them are actually libertarian, which is kind of strange in a country that maybe is the most left wing country in Latin America. But yeah, yeah, it has grown certainly, like the American expat community, and I don't know what's going to be its impact on the on the elections. In some areas, like when it's just tourism, it maybe has generated like much more growth than expected. But it's going to be I mean, it depends. It varies from place to place. Like there are places where people stay 1 month. There are places where people are moving.
Mhm.
Ecuador used to be that place, but because of the state of emergency, kind of their security kind of problems that they have. Like a lot of them are leaving, not all to other parts of Latin America, but yeah, it was it also show how like not always permanent things are, and I think yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch this year electorally. I think it's interesting because like as you mentioned in Chile, like there is also elections,
Mhm.
and a lot of people are predicting that the left is going to be weakened because despite it having given some prerogatives on the economic side of the issue, I think they are losing a bit of the dialogue in terms of security and in terms of immigration. So
Are
um,
they getting hit? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Is Chile getting hit with refugees from Venezuela as well?
yes,
Really? Are they getting hit with Haitians too, or just Venezuelans?
Haitians too. Like and it's much more complex because they also have much more economic immigrants from well from Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, Colombia. So not just refugees properly, like, but yeah, it has been a place of strong immigration historically. Although it has, like, by the way, like for example, like American expats used to go to Chile, like almost no goes now, like for some. But the yes, now like the immigration to Mexico is mostly from neighboring countries. To some degree to from Haiti. There are some Dominicans too, as far as I'm aware. But yeah, it's mostly from South Americans and Haitians and Dominicans. So that's what is going on lately. Um, I think the reception have been very different. And I think that the most conflict has been with Venezuelans, particularly because of the link of the Tren de Aragua, which is this kind of criminal network that is Venezuelan. Uh,
So that the story that the news is reporting, that there's a criminal element from Venezuela coming up through Chile?
yes, I think that has been kind of the framing. I will say that the in a way, like Chile is having a security like issue in the sense like the that it was considered also one of the safest countries in Latin America.
Mhm.
So now it's not as safe, but
Ah,
it is still is not, at levels of that that El Salvador was until until recently, or Honduras for what matter now. Also, I think it has decreased a bit, but yeah, it's in the it has seen the perception of insecurity is probably like what generates kind of a much more a public perception that is changing. And I think also there is, from anthropological way, Chile sees itself as unique in a way, as try to be isolated from Latin America, and in that sense, um, I think it is kind of strange for them to see like a very increase in immigration, um, and I think it is a bit of change that has kind of put in a difficult position, like Chilean politicians, and on the left also some corruption scandals, not as big as in other countries, but it still have tainted like part of the left politics in Chile. So those elements are still kind of giving. giving a lot of nightmares to left wing politicians. In Brazil, something interesting that has happened was like the detention of police officers related to the death of
I
Marielle Franco.
saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this probably shows that kind of like how deep the racism, sexism, and homophobia of the Brazilian police was. There is, I think, a scholar that used to taught in a political scientist. I'm forgetting her name, but she wrote a book about. She's an American political scientist. She wrote a book about policing in Latin America, and she was mentioned, for example, in Bolivia, and comparing to Brazil, and she was saying that in Bolivia, like sometimes the police like go after like kind of like street sellers, thing like that. But it was not something nice to watch. But like they were saying like, oh, go out of here, like you shouldn't sell here. But
Mm,
when she saw that in Brazil, it was just like the some giant kind of combat riot, like police like attacking a grandmother, like something like that, which like she was so like that was really extreme. So uh, I think that in a way the Brazilian police was perceived to be as much more violent, but also in a way much more willing to engage in combat, like because as I mentioned, in some parts of Latin America, I think there is a perception that the police against the real criminals is not willing to fight. But in the case of the Brazil, like they are very fond of using weapons, so that's not their quarrel with them. Like their quarrel is like the abuse of their use of weapons. Like sometimes they just start to shoot like in an area like has a lot of civilians. So it is like kind of the armed restraint and the relation between kind of the army and the police and with the far right politics, which also like kind of led to Bolsonaro, and now like some argue we are seeing the political end of Bolsonaro, but not the end of Bolsonarismo, because the Bolsonarismo evolved. Like Bolsonaro himself was kind of a national conservative in some way, like kind of a big government conservative but
yes.
reactionary.
Yes.
And then uh, to get elected, he tried to reach some sort of libertarian rhetoric. But then when he was elected, like he tried to do a lot of populism, which was curious because like the Brazilian libertarians of all people like were the ones that started criticizing him, and actually I think they left his coalition.
Well, I mean, he wanted to return to the dictatorship. We have to be honest. He really dug that dictatorship. He came up in the dictatorship, if I'm not mistaken, didn't he?
Came out of the military.
Yeah, during the dictatorship, right?
Yep.